A story is unfolding across Chinese media platforms, one filled with national pride, technological ambition, and geopolitical tension. The narrative? Huawei, China's embattled tech giant, is preparing to walk away from Windows and launch a new generation of personal computers powered entirely by its own HarmonyOS operating system. According to widespread reports, laptops currently rolling off Huawei's production lines have already made the switch to Linux-based systems. And soon, the company is expected to unveil the X90 chip, a processor designed specifically for the HarmonyOS Next platform, marking Huawei's full-scale entry into the personal computing industry. The reaction has been electric. Across social media, comment sections, and tech forums, voices are rising in celebration. For many, this represents more than just a product launch. It's a declaration of technological independence, a statement that China can stand on its own even when cut off from the world's most dominant software ecosystem. But beneath the applause and patriotic fervor lies a more complicated truth. The reality behind the headlines. Let's be clear. Huawei isn't abandoning Windows out of choice. It's being forced out. Microsoft's licensing agreement to supply Huawei has expired. In simpler terms, Microsoft has cut ties. Huawei can no longer legally pre-install Windows on its machines. This isn't a strategic pivot, it's a survival maneuver. And yet, there's a deeper irony here. What was meant to cripple Huawei may actually be accelerating something the United States has long feared: the rise of a fully independent Chinese computing ecosystem. To understand why this matters, we need to step back and look at where Huawei came from, and how it became a symbol of China's technological aspirations, how Huawei became a household name. When Huawei entered the laptop market just a few years ago, few believed it could compete with established giants like Lenovo, Dell, or HP. But within a remarkably short period, the company climbed to second place in China's domestic market. Its sleek designs, competitive pricing, and growing brand loyalty made it a formidable force. For Huawei, profitability has always been the priority. As a private enterprise operating in one of the world's most cutthroat business environments, the company has little room for ideological posturing. If using American components made financial sense, Huawei used them. If partnering with Microsoft meant better margins, the partnership continued. But the United States had other plans. Through a series of sanctions, export controls, and licensing restrictions, Washington has systematically attempted to shut Huawei out of global technology supply chains. The goal? To prevent the company from accessing advanced chips, software, and manufacturing tools. Yet paradoxically, this pressure campaign may have done more to help China than harm it. By forcing Huawei to innovate independently, the United States has inadvertently accelerated the development of domestic alternatives that might have taken decades to mature otherwise. And nowhere is this more visible than in the personal computer industry. China's three paths to domestic computing. To understand the significance of Huawei's move, it's important to recognize that China has long pursued multiple strategies for achieving technological self-sufficiency in computing. These efforts can be divided into three main categories. First, there are the so-called domestic brands like Lenovo. On paper, Lenovo is a Chinese company. It's headquartered in Beijing and is often showcased as a national champion. But look under the hood, and the picture becomes less flattering. Nearly every critical component, from Intel or AMD processors to Windows operating systems, comes from American companies. Lenovo's role? Mostly assembly. Early government procurement policies gave Lenovo a significant leg up, helping it become the world's largest PC manufacturer by volume. But in terms of true technological independence, this model offers almost nothing. If the United States decides to cut off chip or software supplies, Lenovo's production lines would grind to a halt overnight. Second, there are X86 compatible processors developed through licensed agreements. Some Chinese companies have purchased the rights to use the X86 instruction set, the fundamental architecture that powers most traditional PCs. Through partnerships with companies like VIA Technologies, Chinese chip makers have developed processors that can run Windows and Linux, albeit with significantly weaker performance compared to Intel or AMD chips. With support from China's state-backed semiconductor manufacturer SMIC, these chips have reached the 14-nanometer and 7-nanometer production nodes. They're functional, but far from cutting edge. Paired with domestically designed graphics cards, these systems represent a fallback option, a way to keep critical infrastructure running if United States supply chains are suddenly severed. But this approach has clear limitations. It's essentially stockpiling older technology, suitable for emergencies but not for long-term growth. Third, there are fully independent architectures like Lungsan. Lungsan represents the most radical departure from Western standards. It uses its own instruction set, avoiding reliance on x86 or ARM architectures controlled by American firms. Paired with deeply customized versions of open-source Linux and Android, and now increasingly with HarmonyOS, Lungsan systems aim for complete technological sovereignty. Combined with domestic office software like WPS and open-source tools for image editing and 3D modeling, this ecosystem offers genuine security and control. But the trade-offs are steep. Performance lags far behind international standards, and the software ecosystem remains painfully sparse. Lungsan survives primarily through government contracts and purchases by state-owned enterprises. It serves sensitive industries where security concerns outweigh performance needs, but it lacks the scale, influence, and market appeal needed to challenge Western dominance. Until now, each of these three pathways has carved out its own niche, but none have posed a serious threat to the ecosystems built by Microsoft, Apple, Google, Intel, and AMD. Compared to the mature, deeply integrated platforms developed over decades in Silicon Valley, China's domestic PC industry remains fragmented and underpowered, kind of like a child trying to wrestle with giants. But, Huawei is different. Huawei is not a state-owned enterprise padding its balance sheet with guaranteed government contracts. It's a private company that has thrived in brutally competitive global markets. It has survived and prospered by building products that people actually want to buy. And it has something none of the other domestic players possess: proven technological capability, brand recognition, and enormous scale. This is a company that, until recently, was the world's largest telecommunications equipment supplier. A company that developed its own smartphone chips when others said it couldn't be done. A company that, even after being placed on the U.S. Entity List and cut off from critical suppliers, managed to stage a remarkable comeback in the mobile phone market. Within just 1 year of re-entering the smartphone market with domestically produced chips, Huawei reclaimed the number 2 position in China. That wasn't achieved through government mandates or nationalist appeals. It happened because consumers, many of them affluent, discerning buyers, chose Huawei products based on quality and performance. If Huawei can replicate this success in personal computing, the implications are, well, pretty profound. Breaking the cycle of mediocrity. Historically, China's domestic PC market has been defined by a frustrating paradox. These machines were purchased not because they were good, but because they were necessary. Government departments and sensitive institutions, bound by national security concerns, had no choice but to procure them. The result? Overpriced, underperforming systems that were often worse than decade-old second-hand computers. Industrial junk wrapped in patriotic slogans. Most of these companies were backed by state-owned entities or politically connected insiders. They had little incentive to innovate because their survival was guaranteed through policy rather than performance. But Huawei operates under a different set of pressures. It must compete, it must innovate, and it carries a unique distinction. It has been certified as a national security threat by the United States government. This label, intended to isolate the company, has instead elevated its status within China. Huawei now enjoys the same procurement priority as traditional domestic vendors, but with vastly superior research and development capabilities. With the release of powerful computing chips like the X90, paired with the HarmonyOS platform, Huawei can finally offer government employees and sensitive industry workers a comfortable, reliable computing experience. No more tortured workflows, no more clunky interfaces and endless compatibility issues. And as SMIC's manufacturing processes continue to improve, industry observers expect Huawei's chips to reach performance levels comparable to TSMC's mature 5-nanometer nodes within the next year. There are even rumors, unconfirmed but widely discussed, that Huawei is developing its own extreme ultraviolet lithography machine, currently in testing phases. If true, this would represent a seismic shift. China's domestic PC hardware could reach world-class performance standards sooner than anyone anticipated. The ecosystem problem, and Huawei's solution. But hardware is only half the equation. The real challenge has always been software. Past attempts at building domestic PC ecosystems stumbled over a simple but insurmountable problem: lack of applications. Using x86 compatible chips with Windows meant failing government procurement requirements. Pairing them with Linux left users with a barren software landscape. Popular Chinese applications like WeChat, QQ, DingTalk, and WPS technically have Linux versions, but because the user base is so small, developers rarely update or optimize them. The result is a massive functionality gap compared to Windows, iOS, and Android platforms. Traditional domestic PC vendors simply lack the scale and influence to change this. Their customer base was too narrow, their corporate reach too limited. Building a healthy software ecosystem requires critical mass, something they could never achieve. Huawei, however, is different. HarmonyOS has already secured support from nearly every major domestic software company. Through a combination of strategic subsidies, government backing, and sheer market power, Huawei is rapidly building a functional ecosystem. And because Huawei ships enormous volumes of devices, from smartphones to tablets to wearables, software developers have a genuine financial incentive to invest in HarmonyOS. Larger user bases mean more revenue potential, which creates a virtuous cycle of development and improvement. Apple and Google both started with sparse app stores. Today, they enforce strict quality controls because developers are desperate to be included. There's no reason Huawei can't follow the same trajectory, but only if it maintains scale and sustained investment. This is a long, difficult road, but Huawei has something most domestic competitors lack: the resources and determination to see it through. Does HarmonyOS have a real future? So the question remains, can Huawei's HarmonyOS-powered PCs actually succeed? As someone who relies heavily on personal computers for work, I can offer a clear answer: yes, absolutely. The government and sensitive enterprise procurement market alone will provide Huawei with substantial guaranteed revenue. Traditional domestic vendors will be pushed to the margins. Combined with cash flow from telecommunications and cloud computing, Huawei's PC division has a secure foundation. But there's also significant potential in the consumer market. Windows, despite its dominance, has become increasingly frustrating. With support from legions of engineers in India and elsewhere, Microsoft has created an operating system plagued by forced updates, bloated background processes, and escalating bugs. For many users, myself included, Windows has become unbearable. My work doesn't require specialized professional software like AutoCAD, 3D Max, Maya, or the Adobe Creative Suite. I need lightweight video editing tools like CapCut, basic image processing applications, and simple office software. If a computer can also handle light entertainment, casual gaming, media streaming, I have no reason to remain tethered to Windows. 2 weeks ago, I made the switch. I migrated my entire workflow from Windows 11 to an M1 MacBook I had purchased years earlier but rarely used. It had been sitting in a corner, gathering dust. The transformation was immediate. CapCut, OBS, and other essential tools ran flawlessly. Even Chrome performed better than on Windows. I bought a docking station and a 2 TB external hard drive, and suddenly this machine became my primary production tool. My M1 MacBook, with its 8-core processor and 16 GB of memory, outperforms my desktop PC, which has an i7 processor, 32 GB of RAM, and an RTX 4060 Ti graphics card in nearly every practical measure. Export times are slightly slower, yes, but the Mac is quieter, more stable, free from forced updates, and far more power efficient. I had planned to purchase an M4 Mac Mini, but if Huawei releases a HarmonyOS PC that supports CapCut and other essential tools, I'll buy it immediately. I believe most people share similar needs. We don't want bloated, bug-ridden systems that try to do everything poorly. We want simple, efficient, stable tools that let us work without interference. My MacBook's gaming performance is far inferior to a traditional Windows PC. But that doesn't diminish my appreciation for it. If Huawei can produce a cost-effective, reliable alternative comparable to a MacBook or Mac Mini, I, and millions like me, would gladly support it. The road ahead. Huawei's journey into the PC market is about more than corporate strategy or national pride. It represents a fundamental shift in how technology power is distributed globally. For decades, American companies have controlled the core infrastructure of modern computing. Processors, operating systems, software ecosystems, all designed, owned, and regulated by firms based in Silicon Valley. But that monopoly is fracturing. Not because of government mandates or ideological campaigns, but because restrictions and sanctions have forced competitors to innovate. Huawei, cut off from Microsoft, has no choice but to build its own path forward. And in doing so, it may achieve something that decades of government policy could not: a genuinely competitive alternative to Windows. The road will be long. There will be setbacks, technical challenges, and market resistance. But Huawei has already proven it can overcome obstacles that would destroy lesser companies. Whether you view Huawei as a symbol of national resilience or a controversial player in a geopolitical chess game, one thing is undeniable. The company has changed the rules, and in the world of personal computing, that change may be just beginning.